The worn rubber soles of Jose's sneakers slapped against the pavement, a frantic, uneven rhythm against the pounding in her chest. She risked a glance over her shoulder. The two men were still there, implacable and relentless in their dark, tailored suits, closing the distance with the practiced ease of wolves. They were her family's fixers, dispatched to drag her to a blind date with a man whose net worth was his only advertised quality. Forcing a burst of speech she didn't possess, she dodged the startled couple and darted into the manicured serenity of a city park, the scent of cut grass and diesel fumes mingling in the air she gulped down. Her lungs burned, every muscle screamed. Just as one of the men reached for her arm, a figure stepped directly into their path. A calm, immovable object in a world of frantic motion. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit so perfectly cut it seemed an extension of his own lean frame. His face was a study in sharp angles and cool indifference. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice a low, steady baritone that cut through the city noise. Pursuing an individual in this manner constitutes harassment under Section 24 of the Public Order Act. Furthermore, any attempt to physically restrain her without cause is a direct violation of her civil liberties. I would advise you to cease immediately. Joyce and her pursuers froze, stunned into silence. The men, accustomed to brute force and intimidation, faltered in the face of such precise, uncheckable authority. They exchanged a nervous look, their momentum broken. Seizing the sliver of opportunity, Joyce's mind raced, adrenaline sharpening her thoughts. She shoved a hand into her pocket and pulled out a cheap, plastic USB drive. Holding it up like a holy relic, her voice, though breathless, was firm. "This contains sensitive, encrypted military research data. My team is monitoring its location. If you damage it, or me, you'll be facing espionage charges. You have 10 seconds to disappear before I trigger the alert." It was a complete fabrication. The drive held her half-finished resume and a collection of pirated ebooks. But the mention of military data and espionage struck a chord of primal fear. The men's faces paled. Without another word, they turned and retreated, melting back into the crowd. The sudden silence was deafening. Joyce sagged against a wrought iron bench, the USB still clutched in her hand. The stranger regarded her, his dark eyes missing nothing. "Military research?" he asked, a ghost of skepticism in his tone. Joyce offered a weak, wry smile, her bravado evaporating. "The data corrupted during a power surge last week. Utterly irrecoverable," she admitted, her honesty a gamble. But they didn't need to know that. A flicker of something not quite amusement, but perhaps respect crossed his features. He gave a single, sharp nod, a calculated risk. He turned to leave, his duty as a citizen apparently concluded. "Wait," Joyce called out, pushing herself off the bench. He had just declared his principles with unnerving clarity. A man who operated by a code. An idea, insane and desperate, crystallized in her mind. "You believe in rules, in honoring a statement. Your word is your bond, isn't it?" He paused, turning back slowly. "It is. I need a husband," she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Not a real one. A temporary, contractual marriage. My family won't stop until I'm tied to one of their business partners. You just saw them. This is my life. A contract with you would give me the freedom I need." He watched her, his expression unreadable. She stood before him, disheveled in her frayed hoodie and worn jeans, proposing an alliance of staggering audacity. To any other man, she would have seemed unhinged. That Ethan Lewis was not any other man. He was bored. Bored of predictable board meetings, of sycophantic yes-men, of a life curated down to the last perfect, monotonous detail. This woman was chaos. She was a flawed, brilliant, unpredictable variable. "Fine," he said, the single word hanging in the air, heavier than 1,000 promises. A flicker of sheer curiosity ignited in his eyes. But not like that. His gaze swept over her. A clinical assessment that was somehow not insulting. Before she could process his agreement, he was leading her out of the park and into a black sedan that materialized at the curb. The ride was silent, the city blaring past the tinted windows. They stopped in front of a building with no sign. Only a stark, minimalist facade. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of lavender and money. It was a high-end boutique, so exclusive it felt more like a gallery. A stylist materialized, all sharp angles and sheet black. "Mr. Lewis, she needs a complete wardrobe. Polish, elegant, for an evening gala," Ethan instructed, his voice leaving no room for questions. Jose's eyes landed on a buttery soft leather jacket, a piece of rebellious armor that called to her. As she reached for it, Ethan spoke without looking at her. "Not that one," he told the stylist. "Start with the dresses." Defeated, Jose allowed herself to be led into a fitting room that felt larger than her apartment. She was stripped of her familiar clothes and zipped into a series of creations made of silk, chiffon, and lace. Each dress was a costume, transforming the woman in the mirror into someone she didn't recognize, a graceful, sophisticated stranger. The fabric felt foreign against her skin, the lines elegant but constricting. She emerged in the final selection, a gown the color of a midnight sky, its fabric shimmering under the recessed lighting. It fit her perfectly, molding to her form in a way that was both beautiful and unnerving. "Turn around," Ethan commanded softly. She obeyed. The back of the dress was a low, elegant V, held together by a delicate clasp at her neck. As he reached to adjust it, his fingers brushed against the skin of her upper back. He paused. His touch, light and clinical, traced the faint, silvery lines that marred her skin, the faded remnants of old scars, a silent map of past struggles she never spoke of. Jose tensed, an involuntary shudder running through her. His hand lingered for a fraction of a second too long, the warmth of his touch a stark contrast to the boutique's sterile chill. He said nothing, but a question now hung between them, a new layer of mystery added to their bizarre contract. He fastened the clasp and stepped back. At that exact moment, through the boutique's large, clear window, Jose saw them. Her stepmother, her face a mask of pinched frustration, walking briskly down the street. Beside her was the man she was supposed to be meeting, a portly figure with a vacant smile. They scanned the faces in the crowd, their eyes sweeping right past the boutique, right past the refined woman in the midnight gown. They didn't even glance at her. They were looking for a girl in a hoodie, not this polished creature standing beside a man like Ethan Lewis. A profound wave of relief washed over her, so potent it was dizzying. For the first time all day, she felt safe, protected. She turned her head, her gaze meeting Ethan's across the hushed showroom. He was already watching her, his expression as impassive as ever. But in his eyes, she saw a shared understanding. The secret was theirs now. Their strange, fragile alliance had been forged, not with a contract or a handshake, but with a silent, knowing glance in a room full of beautiful, empty dresses. The Lewis family estate rose from the manicured hills like a modern-day fortress, its stone and glass facade gleaming under the fading violet sky. As Ethan's black sedan crunched to a halt on the gravel drive, Jose felt a familiar tightening knot in her stomach, the same one she got before a final exam, or a particularly difficult lock-picking commission. This, however, was an entirely different class of security system. They approached the towering oak door, flanked by a discreet, glowing panel. Ethan, moving with the easy ownership of a man born to such places, leaned toward the iris scanner. A soft chime, followed by a pleasant, synthesized voice. "Welcome home, Mr. Lewis." The lock, however, remained resolutely engaged. He frowned, turning to Jose. Apologies. I must have forgotten to add your biometrics to the guest registry. It's a new system. I'll just call security and have them. Don't bother, Jose said, her voice a low murmur. She shrugged off her simple coat, revealing a practical, dark-toned dress that suddenly seemed entirely out of place. From a small, hidden pocket in her handbag, she produced a slim leather roll. Unfurling it revealed not makeup, but a set of gleaming, intricate tools that looked more like a surgeon's instruments than a burglar's kit. Ethan froze, his hand halfway to his phone. The two guards standing sentinel by the entrance shifted, their expressions a mixture of confusion and alarm. Jose, what are you doing? This is a Vontex Series 9 biometric lock. It's tied into the entire estate security grid, and it runs on a subdermal vascular scanner cross-referenced with a crystalline protein algorithm, she replied, selecting a thin, flexible probe. She didn't look at him. Her entire focus narrowed to the seam where the scanner met its housing. It's impressive, but everything man-made has a flaw. Her movements were a study in fluid precision, a delicate dance of metal on metal. There was no brute force, only a series of quiet clicks and subtle pressures. It was less like breaking and entering and more like solving a complex puzzle with an artist's touch. The guards exchanged a nervous glance, unsure whether to intervene or simply witness the impossible. Ethan watched, his mind struggling to reconcile the woman who had bluntly proposed a contract marriage with the expert technician dismantling his family's multi-million-dollar security system before his eyes. Less than a minute later, a final, satisfying thunk echoed in a tense silence. The massive door swung inward with a faint, hydraulic sigh. Jose carefully wiped her tools and rolled them away, tucking the kit back into her bag. She looked up at Ethan's stunned face and offered a small, almost apologetic smile. My granduncle was a master locksmith. Taught me everything he knew. Said a woman should always have a practical skill to fall back on. It paid for my textbooks. The silence that followed them into the grand foyer was heavier than the oak door she'd just conquered. The Lewis family dining room was a theater of old money, all polished mahogany, ancestral portraits, and the hushed clinking of silverware on bone china. Conversation, light and effervescent moments before, evaporated the instant Ethan entered with Jose at his side. He placed a steadying hand on the small of her back, a gesture that felt more like a warning than a comfort. Grandmother, Aunt Victoria, Ethan announced, his voice clear and unwavering. I'd like you to meet my wife, Joe Smith. A collective gasp rippled around the table. His aunt, a woman whose severe chignon seemed to pull her face into a permanent state of disapproval, dropped her fork with a clatter. But it was the woman seated beside her who held Jose's attention. She was flawlessly beautiful, a porcelain doll in a silk dress, her smile a perfect, curated curve. This had to be Lily. Ethan, darling, Lily purred, her voice like honey laced with ice. You always did have a flair for the dramatic. Last we spoke, you were deep into your thesis on quantum computing. I never imagined you had time for such impulsive decisions. Her eyes flickered over Jose, a dismissive assessment that took in everything and valued nothing. At the head of the table, the family matriarch, Grandma Lewis, set down her wine glass. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, held none of her daughter's overt hostility, but a piercing scrutiny that was far more unnerving. She beckoned Jose forward. Jose approached, her posture straight, her gaze steady. The old woman studied her for a long moment before a thin smile touched her lips. Any woman who can surprise my grandson is a woman of interest. She slid a heavy, antique jade pendant across the table. A wedding gift. May you wear it in good health. It was a blessing, but it felt like a test, a heavy opulent weight around her neck. Dinner was an exercise in passive aggression. Aunt Victoria led the charge. The fish fork, there, she said with a vinegar-laced smile, is the one with the wider tines. Later, her gaze fell upon Joyce's hands as she reached for a bread roll. My, what prominent calluses. One would think you'd spent your life engaged in manual labor. The insult hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Lily smirked into her napkin. Ethan's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering along his cheek as he prepared to intervene. But Joyce didn't need his defense. She met his aunt's condescending gaze without flinching, placing her hands palms up on the table for all to see. The calluses were there, stark against her skin. "You're not wrong," Joyce said, her voice even and calm. "My mother insisted I learn Krav Maga from a young age. She said the world isn't always kind to a woman alone. These aren't from labor." She curled her fingers slightly, the gesture unconsciously competent. "They're from training, from learning how to break a man's grip." A different kind of silence descended upon the room. The air crackled with surprise and a grudging, unsettling flicker of respect. The whispers died. Lily's perfect smile faltered. For the first time that evening, the formidable women of the Lewis family looked at the unassuming girl in the simple dress, and had no idea what to make of her at all. The oppressive silence in the Lewis family dining room was a weapon in itself. The clinking of silver against porcelain was the only sound, each tap a sharp, judgmental echo in the cavernous space. Joyce kept her eyes on her plate, feeling the weight of 3 sets of hostile stares. Ethan's grandmother, the steely matriarch, his aunt, dripping with condescending pity, and Lily, the woman who believed this seat, and the man beside her, belonged to her. "Ethan, darling," his aunt, Patricia, began, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. Her voice was soapy, but the words were pure acid. "We must be practical. Disarrangement is untenable. A girl of her background simply cannot fulfill the duties required of a Lewis wife. Lily, on the other hand, has been groomed for this life. She's a concert-level pianist, fluent in 3 languages. She would be an asset." Lily offered a modest, saccharine smile. "I only want what's best for Ethan and the family." At Patricia, Joyce felt a familiar burn of humiliation, the kind that had been a constant companion in her old life. That here, sitting beside the surprisingly solid presence of her new, contractual husband, it felt different. It was a problem to be analyzed, not an insult to be absorbed. Ethan placed his fork down with deliberate slowness. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look at Joyce. His gaze remained fixed on his aunt, his expression as placid as a frozen lake. "Up, Patricia," he said, his tone conversational. "Your portfolio has performed exceptionally well this year. Has it not? The returns from the biotech venture have been significant." Patricia preened, caught off guard by the non sequitur. "Well, yes, your advice has been invaluable." "Good," Ethan continued, a clinical coldness entering his voice. "Then you'll understand that a messy, public divorce right now would be disruptive. It would jeopardize the final phase of my research. The very research, I might add, that currently funds approximately 80% of your lavish lifestyle. I would hate for a legal spectacle to freeze those assets." The shift was instantaneous. The blood drained from Patricia's face, leaving her expertly applied makeup looking like a garish mask. The confident, scheming matriarch vanished, replaced by a woman doing frantic mental calculus. The disdain for Joyce warred with the primal fear of losing her access to the Lewis fortune, and fear won a swift, brutal victory. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. Watching the exchange, Joyce felt an unexpected current of admiration. Ethan hadn't defended her honor with some grand, romantic speech. He had disarmed his opponent with a single, perfectly aimed surgical strike at her most vulnerable point. Her greed. It wasn't chivalry, it was strategy. And in that moment, she felt a burgeoning trust in him. He wasn't just a shield. He was a master tactician, and she was, for now, under his protection. Grandma Lewis, who had observed the entire interaction without a word, finally spoke. Her voice was like gravel. "The boy has made his choice." She leveled a hard, assessing glare at Joyce. For now, it wasn't an acceptance, but a reluctant ceasefire. The message was clear. "You won this battle, but I'm watching you." The rest of the meal passed in a tense, suffocating quiet. As soon as it was over, Joyce excused herself, desperate for air that wasn't thick with unspoken threats. She found her way to the sprawling terrace, the cool night air a welcome relief. Below, a pristine swimming pool shimmered under recessed lighting, a placid turquoise jewel. The tranquility was shattered by the sharp click of heels on stone. "Enjoying the view?" Lily's voice was a venomous whisper behind her. Joyce turned slowly. Lily stood there, holding a cup of coffee, her face a mask of smug superiority. "It's a step up from whatever hovel you crawled out of, I'm sure." "It's a house, Lily. Bricks and mortar," Joyce replied, her tone deliberately mild. "You seem to have mistaken it for a kingdom." Lily's eyes narrowed. The pretense of civility dropped away completely. "You think you've won, don't you? You think that little performance at dinner means anything? You're a temporary inconvenience, a piece of trash he picked up to spite his family." With a vicious flick of her wrist, she held the contents of the cup. Hot, dark liquid flew toward Joyce's face, but Joyce's reflexes, honed by years she never spoke of, were faster. She twisted her body in a fluid, economical motion. The coffee splashed harmlessly onto the flagstones behind her. Before Lily could even register the miss, Joyce stepped forward, her hand flat against Lily's chest, and shoved. It wasn't a wild, frantic push, but a single, decisive action. A shriek tore through the night air as Lily stumbled backward, her arms flailing wildly. She toppled over the edge of the pool with a loud, undignified splash. The commotion brought the family running. Patricia was the first to appear, her face a horrified gasp. "Lily. Oh my God. What did you do to her?" she shrieked at Joyce. Grandma Lewis followed, her eyes like chips of ice. "Assault. In my home, Lily." Now sputtering and crying dramatically in the shallow end, pointed a trembling finger. She attacked me. She pushed me." The accusations rained down on Joyce, a storm of outrage and condemnation. She stood her ground, silent, her heart pounding not with fear, but with a cold, clarifying anger. Then, Ethan was there. He moved through the frantic cluster of his family, his presence instantly commanding the scene. He didn't look at his hysterical cousin or his apoplectic aunt. His eyes found Joyce's. "What happened?" he asked, his voice a calm anchor in the chaos. "She tried to throw her coffee on me," Joyce said, her voice steady. "I moved and I pushed her away. She's lying." Lily wailed, clinging to the side of the pool. "She's violent. A brute." Ethan's gaze dropped to the dark, steaming puddle on the stone patio, exactly where Joyce had been standing. He then looked at the coffee cup lying near Lily's abandoned handbag. He looked back at Lily, whose designer dress was now a ruined, clinging mess. His expression was unreadable, but his logic was not. "You initiated physical contact, Lily," he stated. "It wasn't a question. You threw your drink at my wife." Her response was defensive. He turned to the rest of his family, his voice leaving no room for argument. "The matter is closed." He stepped to Joyce's side, a silent, unyielding statement of solidarity. As his aunt helped a sobbing Lily from the pool, Ethan's gaze met Joyce's. He gave a barely perceptible nod, a quiet confirmation that he had her back. In the face of his family's open hostility, he had drawn a line in the sand, and he had placed himself firmly on her side of it. The struggle was far from over, but for the first time, Joyce Smith didn't feel like she was fighting it alone. The fragile calm on the Lewis mansion's manicured lawn shattered with the screech of tires. A fleet of mismatched, beat-up cars swerved to a halt just outside the wrought iron gates, their doors flying open before the engines died. A dozen rough-looking men spilled out, their faces set in grim lines. In their hands were not designer briefcases, but tire irons, baseball bats, and, glinting ominously in the afternoon sun, a pair of gleaming machetes. Ethan's family, still reeling from the poolside confrontation, froze in collective shock. The security team scrambled, their earpieces crackling with panicked alerts. But they were too late. The men stormed the grounds, their heavy boots tearing up the pristine grass. Leading them was a barrel-chested man with a weathered face and tattoos snaking up his neck. "Juice, are you all right?" he bellowed, his voice a gravelly roar that echoed across the estate. Juice's blood ran cold. Uncle Henry, of all the times, Ethan's aunt, Eleanor, was the first to recover, her face a mask of vindicated fury. "Ethan, look," she shrieked, pointing a trembling, diamond-encrusted finger. "I told you she was trouble. This isn't a family. It's a gang of hooligans." "What is this?" A mob shakedown. Lily, standing beside her, adopted a look of grave concern, though a triumphant glint flashed in her eyes. "Ethan, for the family's safety, you must reconsider this marriage. Her background is clearly shady. This is a liability we can't afford. You have to divorce her immediately." Henry and his men formed a protective semicircle around Jose, their stances aggressive and ready. He glared at Eleanor, then jabbed a thick finger in her direction. "You listen here, lady. We're Jose's family. Anyone lays a hand on her, they answer to me." He brandished a baseball bat for emphasis, its warm wood a stark contrast to the mansion's polished marble. The threat, meant to be protective, landed like a conviction, solidifying every negative assumption the Lewis family held. The air crackled with tension. Ethan stood between the two factions, his jaw tight, his mind racing. He could feel the weight of his family's judgment, the pressure of their world closing in. But when he looked at Jose, he saw not a criminal mastermind, but a woman trapped, cornered by a life she was trying to escape. Her face was deathly pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of mortification and despair. This spectacle was a disaster, a public relations nightmare that confirmed every one of his family's prejudices. But Jose's calculated plan to stop the chaos was already in motion. "There's only one way to shut this down." A sudden wave of manufactured vertigo washed over her. She pressed a hand to her temple, a breath hitching. "Ethan," she whispered, a voice barely audible. Her knees buckled theatrically, her body swaying. Before she could hit the ground, Ethan's arms were around her. He swept her effortlessly, his expression shifting from exasperation to genuine concern. "Juice, what's wrong?" He turned, his back to the stunned crowd, his gaze sweeping over his aunt and Lily with cold authority. "The discussion is over," he stated, his voice low and final. "I will not be discussing a divorce. My wife's health is my only priority." Without another word, he carried her toward the house, his long strides eating up the distance. He ignored the sputtering protests of his hour and the menacing shouts from Henry's crew, his entire focus narrowed to the woman in his arms. As the heavy oak doors closed behind them, they shut out the noise, but not the consequences. The next day, the antiseptic quiet of Ethan's high-tech research lab was a world away from the previous day's chaos. Gleaming chrome and sterile white surfaces stretched across the vast room, dominated by holographic interfaces that shimmered in the air. Ethan and his team of engineers stood around a central console, their faces grim. The project, a revolutionary new engine prototype, was at a complete standstill. The lab door slid open with a soft hiss, and Lily walked in, flanked by Eleanor. Lily wore a crisp lab coat over her designer dress, an obvious affectation. "Ethan, darling," she began, her tone dripping with feigned sympathy. "I heard about your supply chain issue. I spoke with my father this morning. He knows the head of global procurement at Aerodyne Industries. He's more than willing to make a call on your behalf to see if he can't secure what you need. She positioned herself near the console, attempting to look like an integral part of the team. Joyce, who had followed Ethan to the lab, stood silently by the entrance, an observer in a world she wasn't supposed to understand. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his frustration palpable. It's not that simple, Lily. The material we need is a next-generation ceramic matrix composite. It's incredibly heat-resistant, lightweight and rare. The sole global supplier had a catastrophic factory failure. The entire supply is gone. It's practically unobtainable for the foreseeable future. A wave of dejection washed over the research team. Lily's smile faltered. Her father's connections were useless if the material simply didn't exist. I can get it, Joyce said. The words, spoken with quiet confidence, hung in the sterile air. A beat of silence was followed by a sharp, derisive laugh from Eleanor. You don't be ridiculous. What would you know about advanced material science? Did your family find some on the back of a truck? Lily chimed in, her voice laced with condescension. Joyce, this is a highly specialized field. It's not like ordering groceries or online. It's sweet that you want to help, but perhaps you should leave this to the professionals. Joyce ignored them, her gaze fixed on Ethan. Give me access to a terminal. Ethan hesitated for a second, then nodded to a junior engineer, who vacated his seat. The entire lab watched as Joyce sat down, her posture relaxed. The team, Lily and Eleanor, exchanged skeptical glances. She looked completely out of place, a wildflower in a sterile greenhouse. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. There was no hesitation, no searching for keys. She moved with a fluid, startling precision, her eyes tracking lines of code and encrypted network addresses that flashed across the screen. It wasn't the typing of a casual user. It was the work of an expert. In less than a minute, she was done. She leaned back, a small, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. The order is placed, she announced calmly. It should be here shortly, Eleanor scoffed. An order for what? A fairy tale. Honestly, the delusions of this girl before she could finish. The lab's main door slid open again. A frantic logistics assistant rushed in, holding a tablet and looking utterly bewildered. Mr. Lewis, I don't know how this is possible, he stammered, his eyes wide. We just received a Priority 1 shipping notification. A custom-created drone delivery is on approach. It contains 5 kilograms of the CMC. A collective gasp went through the room. Lily's face lit up instantly. My father. He must have pulled it off. I knew he could do it. The assistant shook his head, still staring at his tablet in disbelief. No, ma'am. The manifest is very specific. The recipient isn't the Lewis Corporation. He looked from Ethan to the unassuming woman at the terminal. The package is addressed to a Miss Jo Smith. The afternoon sun dappled through the sycamore leaves of the local park, a stark, vibrant contrast to the sterile opulence of the Lewis estate. Joyce had chosen a location with deliberate care. It was a world away from Grandma Lewis's manicured gardens and silent, echoing halls. I fail to see the purpose of this outing, Joyce, the matriarch stated, her voice as crisp as the starched collar of her blouse. She stood like a fortress of Chanel tweed, observing a group of cheerful seniors with undisguised disdain. They were gathered on a small concrete plaza, moving with surprising energy to a lively folk melody blasting from a portable speaker. This is chaotic, it's called square dancing, Joyce replied, her tone light and breezy. Beside them, the Lewis family's longtime servant, Mrs. Shen, wrung her hands, her expression a mixture of anxiety and morbid curiosity. Joyce had done her research, digging into a past the family rarely spoke of. She knew that before becoming the formidable head of the Lewis clan, Eleanor Lewis had been a celebrated lead dancer in her university's prestigious arts program, a passion buried under decades of duty. "It's vulgar," Grandma Lewis sniffed. Just then, a woman with a bright pink visor and a laugh that could startle birds from trees broke away from the dancing group. Eleanor Vance, is that you?" Grandma Lewis stiffened, her face paling slightly. The use of her maiden name was a ghost from a forgotten life. The woman grabbed her hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "I thought it was you. We danced together at the provincial festival in '68. Don't you remember? Come on. They need a fourth for this set." "I most certainly will not," Grandma Lewis began, trying to pull her hand away. But the woman was a force of nature. She was gently but inexorably pulled toward the circle. Mrs. Chen took a step forward, ready to intervene. But Joyce placed a calming hand on her arm. "Wait," she whispered. "Just watch." For a moment, Grandma Lewis stood rigid in the circle, her posture screaming of mortification. The music swelled, a simple, infectious beat. The other dancers moved around her, their feet tapping, their arms swinging. Then, something shifted. Her fingers, still held by the woman in the pink visor, twitched in time with the music. A flicker of muscle memory. Her feet, clad in sensible but expensive loafers, executed a hesitant shuffle, then a more confident step. The stern mask began to crack. She stumbled once, and instead of anger, a surprised laugh escaped her lips. The other dancers cheered her on, remembering the girl who had once commanded stages, whose every movement was a study in grace, was still there, dormant beneath the hardened shell of the matriarch. Her steps became fluid, her turns precise. She shed the weight of her name, of her responsibilities, of the endless expectations. She was just Eleanor again, a woman lost in the joy of movement, her face flushed with exertion and a forgotten, youthful exhilaration. Watching from the sidelines, Mrs. Chen's eyes filled with tears. She had served the Lewis family for over 30 years and had never seen this woman this raw, unguarded, joyful version of her mistress. She looked at Joyce with a new, profound respect. This girl hadn't just brought a gift or offered empty flattery. She had given the matriarch back a piece of her own soul. As the song ended, Grandma Lewis was breathless, leaning against her new friend and laughing, a genuine, unfiltered sound that echoed through the park. Mrs. Chen rushed forward with a bottle of water. "Madam, your heart, we should go." Grandma Lewis waved a dismissive hand, a bright, uncharacteristic light in her eyes. "Stop fussing, Chen. It's been years." She caught Joyce's gaze over the heads of the other dancers. There was no warmth. Not yet. But the icy contempt was gone, replaced by a grudging, astonished acknowledgement. The first crack in the fortress had appeared. That evening, the air in their new home was quiet, filled with the scent of cardboard and fresh paint. Ethan had insisted they move into one of his private properties, a minimalist house with clean lines and wide windows overlooking a quiet, tree-lined street. It was a sanctuary, miles away from the prying eyes and suffocating judgment of the Lewis family manor. It was a step toward a life that was theirs, even if that life was built on a contract. They were unpacking a box of kitchenware, the easy silence between them a comfortable change from their usual guarded interactions. Joyce held up a ridiculous novelty mug shaped like a cat. "You know," she began, a mischievous glint in her eyes. She placed it on the counter. "When I collapsed at the family dinner, I wasn't entirely unwell." Ethan stopped, a set of plates in his hands. He looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. He replayed the scene in his mind. Lily's triumphant sneer, his grandmother's cold indifference, and the sudden, gut-wrenching sight of Joyce crumpling to the floor. He remembered the ice that had flooded his veins, a primal fear that had nothing to do with their agreement or the future of his company. A slow, Wry's smile touched his lips. He should have known. He was dealing with a woman who outmaneuvered people for a living. So, you faked it. It was a strategic retreat, she corrected playfully, polishing the cat mug with the hem of her sleeve. Lily was about to launch a full-scale assault. I chose the path of least resistance. He set the plates down and stepped closer, his gaze softening, losing its corporate edge. My panic, however, he said, his voice a low, sincere murmur that cut through her playful demeanor, was very real. The air shifted. The game they were playing, the roles they had assumed, all of it seemed to dissolve in the quiet space between them. Joyce looked up at him, her own smile fading as she registered the profound sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't talking about the contract. He wasn't talking about the risk to their plan. He was talking about her. In that moment of manufactured crisis, his concern had been genuine, transcending the legal document that bound them together. She had entered this arrangement as a business transaction, a calculated move to secure her own freedom. She expected resistance, deception, and a lonely battle. She had never expected this quiet, unwavering support from the man who was supposed to be her partner in name only. She realized, with a startling jolt, that the foundation of their convenient marriage was slowly, imperceptibly, being replaced by something solid and true. They stood there for a long moment, the unpacked boxes and the bare walls of their new life fading into the background. It was a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding that the lines they had so carefully drawn had irrevocably blurred. Their unconventional journey was forging a connection deeper than either of them had anticipated, built not on a fairy tale romance, but on a foundation of mutual respect, clever strategy, and an affection that was becoming undeniably real.